Subscribe before we start, and make one guess in the comments. What do you think was still using that tower? Keep your answer until the end. The firefinder was still in the cab. 12 years after the state emptied that tower and sold the contents, the brass instrument sat bolted to its table in the center of the floor, dust cover folded on the sill, sighting ring turned to 213 degrees. I put my hand flat on the housing. It was warm. Everything else in that room was the same temperature as the railing outside, which is to say cold enough to make my knuckles ache. Nobody had been up there in 12 years. I had the only key. The padlock at the bottom was rusted half shut, and the silt on the stairs held one set of boot prints going up, and they were mine. Somebody had stood at that instrument the night before anyway. Sighted a column of smoke, read the bearing off the ring, folded the cover, and gone off shift. The way he'd done it every night since 2013. And there was nothing out on that bearing. Nothing burning, nothing smoking, nothing standing. Nothing worth pointing a 100-year-old instrument at. I'm not a fire guy. I take things down. Niska Salvage and Demolition, 2 trucks, 1 excavator, 1 employee. In July, I won a state contract to drop 4 decommissioned fire towers in Wyman County before the grant money expired at the end of September. And the 6-mile tower was the tallest of the 4, and the only one I hadn't walked yet. I had the key. It was a state padlock with a state key, hanging on a ring in my truck with 3 others. And when I'd cut the brush back from the base that morning, the lock was rusted stiff enough that I had to work oil into it for 10 minutes before it would turn. That's the part I kept coming back to. The lock was original. The trapdoor at the top of the stairs was locked too, same key. And the hinges had rust bleeding down the frame in stripes. Nobody had opened that door in a long time. And the instrument was supposed to be gone. I'd read the decommissioning file twice because I bid the job off it. 6 Mile. Cab stripped November of 2013. Glass intact, stairs sound, contents surplused. Somebody at the state had typed a list of what came out of that tower, and the Osborne firefinder was the first line on it, because it was the only thing up there worth real money. An Osborne is a beautiful piece of equipment. Brass and steel, a horizontal ring stamped with all 360 degrees, sights on either side so an observer could line up a column of smoke and read off the compass bearing to it. They quit making them before I was born. Collectors want them. Restored in a private sale, one of those is worth more than I clear in a good month. And I stood there in the cold with my hand on it and did that math before I did any other math. And I'd like to say I didn't. It was on nobody's paperwork. It didn't exist. If I put it in my truck, no ledger anywhere in the state of Michigan would show a hole. So my first thought wasn't ghosts. My first thought was that somebody had gotten in there. I checked it the way you'd check anything. The cab has windows on all 4 sides and a catwalk around the outside. And I went around the whole thing looking for a busted pane or a pried frame and found neither. The glass was filthy but whole. The trapdoor was the only way in, and it had been locked from the outside. The stairs, 100 feet of them, switching back on themselves inside the steel, had a fine gray silt on every tread, the kind that takes years to lay down. And coming up, I'd left a set of boot prints in it, and there was nothing else. No prints going the other way. Not a scuff, not a broom mark. Hunters use these towers sometimes. Kids do. But hunters leave beer cans, and kids leave names. And there was nothing in that cab but the table, the stool, a wall-mounted cabinet, and a laminated card thumbtacked over where a radio used to be. I opened the cabinet drawer because that's the job. You inventory before you demolish. Inside there was a stub of pencil, a rusted pair of dividers, and a single page in a plastic sleeve. Somebody had typed it a long time ago, and somebody else had gone over the faded parts in ballpoint. End of shift. Then a list. Log final observations. Set the ring to 0. Cover the instrument. Report out of service to dispatch. Secure the door. I read it twice. I don't know why I did what I did next. Habit, I think I'd been up since 5. I was tired. I had a list of my own. But I set the ring back to 0, which is north, and I unfolded the canvas cover and put it over the instrument, and I snugged the tie down. Then I went back down and locked the trap door and the base door and drove into town. Cody Pelkey was at the shop when I got there, running a wire wheel on the excavator's thumb pin. He's 24 and he's got a baby coming in November. And there's no other work in Wyman County for a kid with his skill set. So he's careful with me in a way that I don't much enjoy. I told him 6 Mile was clean, stairs were sound. We'd take it down last because it was tallest, and I wanted the other 3 under our belt. I didn't mention the firefinder. Not that day. I want to put the money on the table here because it matters to everything that came after. I bid that 4-tower package low. Not stupid, but low. Low enough that I got it. And the reason I got it is that the state had to move 4 towers with money that turned into a pumpkin on the 30th of September. I had a note on the excavator with 14 payments left. My mother had been at the county medical care facility on the far edge of town since March. And the part Medicaid doesn't cover comes out of me. And it's not a huge number, but it's every month, forever. I had exactly one way to make September work, and it was those 4 towers. By the end of that month, I had one hand that worked. No machine to run it with. And the 4 towers on the ground, anyway. I'm telling you that now, so you understand, I'm not building to a surprise. The surprise was mine, and I already had it. So when I say I went back out to 6 Mile the next morning, understand that I wasn't chasing anything. I was going to check the anchor bolts on the northeast leg and take pictures for the drop plan. I got there a little after 8. The base lock was still stiff. The stair dust still held my prints from the day before and nothing else. And I stopped twice on the way up to look at it. And it was mine. Both directions. A man's boots going up and coming down. The trapdoor was locked. I opened it and stood up into the cab. The cover was folded on the sill. Not thrown, not blown folded in thirds the way I'd found it the first time. The way a person does it who's done it 1,000 times and has a place they put it. And the ring was turned to 213 degrees. I stood there for a while. I remember hearing a raven go over the roof. I got out my phone and pulled up the picture I'd taken of the floor the day before and held it up and compared it. And it was the same floor. Same dust, same drag mark by the stool leg, same dead moth by the southwest corner. I put my hand on the brass housing and it was warm again, not hot, about like a mug of coffee somebody set down 20 minutes ago and forgot. 213 degrees. I stepped over to the southwest glass and sighted along that bearing out over the county. And there was nothing out there. Cedar swamp, second-growth aspen, a long low ridge, and past that the haze where the land drops toward the river. No town, no structure I could see. Nothing burning, nothing smoking, nothing worth pointing a 100-year-old instrument at. The sensible thing was to call the district office and tell them their empty tower had a visitor. I didn't. Partly because the instrument was worth money and off the books, and I hadn't decided yet what I was going to do about that. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But mostly because I'd have had to explain that I'd found it turned, set it back, locked the door behind me, and found it turned again. And I could hear exactly how that would sound coming out of my mouth to a woman in Escanaba who had 4 towers, 1 deadline, and a contractor she'd never met. so I set the ring to 0 again. I covered it. I tied it down, locked the door, and photographed the dust on every third tread going down. Then I went home and set an alarm, because I decided to be there the next morning early enough that nobody could have beaten me to it. Third morning, 6:45, and it was 213 again with the cover folded on the sill. I didn't touch it. I sat down on the stool and drank the coffee I'd brought and looked at it for about 20 minutes, and then I called Escanaba. Robin Teskey is the district facilities coordinator for the DNR out of that office, and she's the one who signed my contract. Pleasant, fast, the kind of person who answers her own phone and has your file open before you finish saying your name. I asked her whether anybody else held keys to the 6 Mile site. "You've got the set," she said. "There's a set in a cabinet here that I'd have to sign out, and I haven't. Why, is there damage?" I said I wanted to confirm the contents list before I went in with a machine, because if something in there was still state property, I didn't want it in the debris pile. Paper moving on her end. Cab was stripped in November of 13. I've got the sheet. Firefinder, radio, telephone set, stool, first aid kit, binoculars, the map board. All of it went out on one truck to the surplus warehouse in Marquette, and the firefinder sold at auction the following spring. A pause. That one always goes first. People want them for their cabins. So there's nothing up there. There's a table and a cabinet, per this. Anything else is somebody's trash. Her voice shifted a little, the way it does when somebody starts calculating. "Wait, is this a scope problem?" "Because I can note a discrepancy, but I can't add money and I can't add days. Everything has to be on the ground and hauled by the 30th, or the funds revert and I have to claw back the whole package." I told her it wasn't a scope problem. "Good," she said, and she meant it kindly. "You're my only contractor who's ahead of schedule." I stood in the cab for a minute after she hung up, holding my phone, looking at a piece of brass the state of Michigan had sold to somebody in Marquette in the spring of 2014. Two things were true and they couldn't both be. Either the state's paperwork was wrong, or the thing in front of me was wrong. The paperwork being wrong is ordinary. Paperwork is wrong constantly. But wrong paperwork doesn't fold a canvas cover in thirds overnight in a room I locked. Cody caught it out of me that afternoon on the Berglund Tower, the little one south of town, when we were pulling the guy anchors. "You keep going out to 6 Mile, he said. 3 days running. What's up there?" "Anchor bolts are ugly." "Ugly how?" "Corroded." Which was true, and which had nothing to do with anything. I heard myself say it, and I kept my eyes on the wrench. That was the first lie I told him, and it was a small one, and I have thought about it more than it deserves. If I'd told him the truth that afternoon, he'd have wanted to see it. And he'd have gone up in the daytime with me, standing there, and the whole thing might have played out differently. Or it might have played out exactly the same, I don't know. That night, I made a decision that seems obvious now, and didn't then. If something was happening in that cab, it was happening between when I locked the door and when I opened it, so I ought to be there in the dark. I've got a scanner in my truck, an old Uniden I bought when I was doing county culvert work, and wanted to know where the road commission was. I drove out to 6 Mile around 8, parked at the base with the windows down, and let it run. There's a repeater on Coon Hill that carries the county fire frequency, and it's quiet out there most nights. A medical call in the village around 8:30, a rig going to a lift assist. Then nothing for a long while, just the hiss and the occasional squelch break. At 9:20, the radio opened up. Not a voice first, a carrier, that dead air sound a radio makes when somebody keys a microphone and doesn't talk yet, when the channel is being held open by a transmitter somewhere. My scanner has a little display that shows the unit identifier if the system sends one, and the system out here does. It said 6 mile. Then a man's voice, unhurried, a little nasal, the voice of somebody who has said the same sentence a few thousand times. Central, 6 mile. I've got smoke. The channel went quiet for a second, and I sat there with my hand halfway to the volume knob and my heart going in my ears. Bearing 213. Columns tight, holding straight up, no lean on it. Best guess 3-4 miles out on that line. More dead air. Nobody answered him. The carrier held maybe another 40 seconds, and in that time, he said one more thing, quieter, like he'd turned his head away from the mic. Central, 6 mile. Then it dropped, and the frequency went back to hiss. I got out of the truck. I don't remember deciding to. There is no power at 6 mile. The line was cut at the pole in 2013. I'd checked it myself for the drop plan. And there is no radio in that cab. Only a laminated card, thumbtacked over the place where one used to be. And I stood at the bottom of 100 feet of dark steel with my neck bent back, and there was nothing up there. No light, no sound. The tower stood there like a tower. I did not go up. I want that on the record. I got back in my truck, and I drove home, and I sat in my kitchen until after midnight. The next evening, Cody went up. He didn't ask me. He told me after, and he told me because he was shook enough that he couldn't not. He'd heard me talking to myself about the scanner. And he's 24, and he had his phone out to record it. And around 9:15, he was standing on the catwalk on the southwest side because that's where he'd figured out the numbers pointed. He said the glass got hot, not warm, hot. He had a canvas work shirt on, and he had his forearm resting against the frame, and he said it came up through the sleeve fast enough that he pulled back and swore. And then he put his palm flat on the pane and had to take it off. That's the southwest window. Outside temperature was maybe 50. There was nothing in that cab to make heat. No stove, no wiring. Nothing but a table and a stool and a piece of brass. And it wasn't the whole room, he said. He was sitting on my tailgate the next morning telling me this, and he kept turning his hand over and looking at it. Just that side, like standing next to a burn barrel with your back cold. You hear anything? Radio thing, same as you said. He shrugged and it came out wrong, too loose. It's on my phone. It's garbage. You can't hear the words, but you can hear it. His palm was pink. Not blistered, not marked. Just pink like he'd been carrying a hot casserole dish. I told him he was done. No 6 mile, not on his own, not after dark, not ever. He argued for about 90 seconds, and then he looked at my face and quit. I want to be careful about how I say the next part. I wasn't scared for myself yet. I was scared the way you get when a kid you're responsible for does something on your job site and comes back with a mark on him. Because that's a MIOSHA form, and a workers' comp file, and a phone call from a woman in Escanaba. And because his girlfriend was 7 months along, and I was the only paycheck in that house. That afternoon, I went to the county building. The records counter is on the first floor behind glass with a talk-through screen. And the clerk is a woman named Arlene Voss, who's been there long enough that people just say Arlene like it's the name of the office. Gray bob, reading glasses on a chain, cardigan in September. I'd pulled culvert permits from her a dozen times. I said I was doing work for the state at the 6 Mile Tower, and I needed the radio traffic logs for the county fire frequency, a week's worth, whatever they retain. She didn't look up. Those aren't public. They're not? Dispatch records are exempt under the Act. You'd want a subpoena or a request through the sheriff, and the sheriff will tell you the same thing. She said it smoothly, the way you say a thing you've said many times. And she reached for a stack of tax rolls to square up. I'm not after a call, I said. I'm after one unit ID. It keys up every night at the same time, and I want to know why the system still recognizes it. The ID is 6 Mile. Her hand stopped on the stack. She kept them there. She didn't square the papers, and she didn't set them down. And through the glass, I watched her look at the counter in front of her for a good 4 or 5 seconds, which is a long time when nobody's talking. That was Roy, she said. She'd said it before she decided to. I could see it land on her. Her chin came up and her face closed like a door, and she pulled the stack toward her and got up off the stool. Those records aren't public, she said again. You'd need to go through the sheriff. And she went into the back where I couldn't follow her. The Ellsworth Township Fire Hall sits behind the ball field. 2 bays and a gravel apron. And Bud Lance was in the near bay with the hood up on the tanker when I pulled in. He's been chief out there since before I moved back. 60s, heavy through the shoulders. One of those men who talks to you while looking at a piece of equipment. I said I had a question about an old call. I've got a bad injector, he said. You know anything about injectors? I said I knew a little about diesels. He let me hand him tools for 20 minutes. I understood what he was doing, and I let him do it. Because you don't get anything out of a man like Bud by pushing on him. When he finally wiped his hands, he said, Which old call? August of 2013. Smoke report off the 6 Mile tower. He put the rag in his back pocket and didn't say anything for a bit. Then he said, That's the Kessler fire. And he walked into the office at the back of the bay, and I followed him. The office was a card table, a filing cabinet, and a county wall map with a coffee stain in the northeast corner. He opened the second drawer of the cabinet and took out a folder about 3/4 of an inch thick and set it on the table. And he sat down across from it like he didn't want to touch it twice. You're not the first person to ask me about 6 Mile, he said. You're the first one who works for the state. I'm a contractor. I'm taking the tower down. I know what you are. He tapped the folder. You know what happened in 13? I said I knew a house burned. House burned, he said. Woman and her boy in it. Kessler place off Torch Line. 2 miles in on that grade past the gravel pit. He looked at the map instead of me. Roy Ellefson called the smoke in from the tower at 9:20. Dispatch didn't have a correlating report. Nobody else called it. No glow visible from the road. And Roy was... He stopped and started over. Roy was 68 years old, and he'd called in some smokes that turned out to be fog on the river. So they logged it unconfirmed and didn't assign anybody. Nobody called me. I found out at 6 the next morning from the sheriff. And you'd have gone. I'd have gone. He said it flat. That's what a truck's for. You roll, and you find out it's fog, and everybody goes home, and you fill out a form. That's the whole job. He pulled the folder toward him. They shut the tower that November. Said it was budget. Roy died the next year, February, in his sleep. He was not a well man. I asked him what was in the folder. He turned it around and pushed it across. 11 fires. 11 separate structures, going back to 2014. Each one with a couple pages of the incident sheet. Sometimes a fire marshal referral. Sometimes a photocopied insurance letter. A pole barn on Grade Road. A camp on Hemlock Lake. A well house. A garage. A vacant farmhouse. A sugar shack. 2 more camps. A boat shed. A storage building behind the co-op. and a detached garage that went up in the middle of June this year, off Alger Road, a man's Bronco project, and 40 years of tools. Every single one of them said the same thing in the cause box. Undetermined. 11 undetermined in a township this size, I said. 11 in 11 years. He shrugged. You put that in front of a fire marshal, he tells you rural buildings burn. Bad wiring, mice on the insulation, hot ash in a bucket, some fella cutting rebar next to a gas can. And he's right. Every one of those, I could tell you a story that makes sense. But you keep them in a drawer. I keep them in a drawer. He was quiet a second. You want to know why they're not in the county system? Because our fire rating and half our funding runs off numbers. You start writing pattern on paper, and you've got the state fire marshal out here for a year and every insurance company in this county repricing every policy. And I've got a tanker with a bad injector and 18 volunteers, and I can't buy hose as it is. He looked up. That's not an excuse. That's just what it costs. I asked him if there was any way an old fire report could still be alive. Somewhere in the system. He gave me a look I couldn't read. There's a thing people don't understand about fires, he said. A fire isn't out because it's out. Water on it, ash cold, that's not out. A fire's out when somebody with a name on a card stands in front of it and says the words on the frequency. And the reporting unit reports out of service. And dispatch writes a disposition on the incident number. 3 pieces. You do all 3 and that call is closed and it's history. You skip one, that number sits open in the system forever. And every so often some clerk finds it and asks a supervisor what to do with it. And the supervisor says, leave it alone. It's before my time. He tapped the table once with 2 fingers. Nobody ever released 6 Mile that night. Nobody wrote a disposition. There's no fire out and no unit out of service. That call is still open. I said, do you know that, or are you guessing? I looked it up, he said. In 2016. Once. And he didn't say anything else about it. He let me take pictures of the 11 incident sheets. He wouldn't let me take the folder. I put them up on the wall of my shop that night, and I got the plat book out, and I found each address and stuck a pin in it. I want to say I saw the line right away. I didn't. 11 pins scattered over a township looks like 11 pins. I made coffee and came back and stood there, and it was Cody, of all people, who was in the shop the next morning looking for a socket set and stopped and said, "Huh, that's kind of straight." It was kind of straight. I laid a yardstick on it. Starting from the Kessler Foundation off Torchline and running away to the southwest, the 11 pins fell within about 100 yards of a single line. And the ones near the start were bunched close together, and the ones out near this year were farther along. And they went in order. Oldest nearest the foundation, newest farthest out. I sighted the line back the other way, northeast, past the foundation and out. It ran straight at the 6 Mile tower. 213 degrees is southwest. Looking out from the cab along that bearing, you're looking down the line at the Kessler place, and everything that has burned since has burned on the far side of it, walking away from the tower. I sat down on an overturned bucket in my own shop and put my hands on my knees. Here's the part I hadn't let myself get to yet. In August of 2013, I was hauling scrap out of a farm sale near Ewan, and I was coming home late on Torchline Road. And there was a glow-off through the trees to the north, up that grade past the gravel pit. I saw it. I slowed down for it. And I told myself it was a burn barrel, because it was August, and people burn brush in August, and because I had a loaded trailer and 11 miles to go, and I wanted to be in bed. I never told anybody that. Not the sheriff, not my wife, when I still had one. Nobody. It sat in me for 12 years, the size of a pea. And it got bigger the day Bud Lance said the word Kessler out loud in his own fire hall. I'm not going to make more of it than it is. Roy Ellefson saw that fire from 20 miles off and reported it correctly, and it didn't help. So a phone call from me on a county road probably wouldn't have changed the outcome either. But I didn't make the call. That's a fact. And it's mine. And it's why I did what I did next, instead of driving to Escanaba and telling Robin Teskey her tower was haunted. I went up at night. September 11th, a Thursday. I parked at the base at 9, and I climbed with a headlamp and my handheld radio clipped to my chest. And I unlocked the trap door and stood up into the cab at about 10 after. Cold room. 50-some degrees outside and about that inside. I could see my breath in the beam. The cover was on the instrument where I'd left it 4 days before, and the ring was at 213 underneath it, because I'd quit resetting it by then. I stood by the north glass where I could see the stairs, and I waited. At 18 after, the room changed. It came off the southwest side, and Cody had described it right. It was one-sided, like standing at the open door of a wood stove. I felt it on my cheek and the back of my hand first. I moved toward it because I'm an idiot, and because I had to know. And about 4 feet from that glass, it stopped being interesting and started being something I didn't want to stand in. Not scalding. The way it feels when you get too close to a bonfire and your jeans get hot on one leg. In a sealed room in a dead building with nothing in it. My handheld opened up. It's a portable on the county frequency, which I carry because half my job sites want me monitoring. The display lit. 6 Mile. Central, 6 Mile, I've got smoke. He was in the room. That's how it sounded. Not the tinny thing out of a speaker on a truck seat. It filled that cab. And it came from the direction of the heat. And it was a tired old man's voice being professional at the end of a long day. Bearing 213. Columns tight, holding straight up, no lean on it. Best guess 3, 4 miles out on that line. The brass turned. The cover was on it. I saw the whole shape of it shift. The canvas moved with the ring. The tie-down went slack on one side and came tight on the other. And I heard the sound the instrument makes when it turns, a fine, dry grind. And then the tie-down slipped and the cover came off the top and settled itself down the table and folded, in thirds as it went. 213. Central 6 Mile, he said again, quieter. And the display went dark and the heat went out of the room like somebody had shut a door. And I was standing in the cold with my ears ringing from the silence. I looked at my watch. It was 24 past 9. I had been in there 14 minutes, and about 4 of them had mattered. I got down the stairs faster than a man my age ought to on wet steel. I did the arithmetic that night on the shop floor with a Platt book and a calculator and a straight edge. And it took me until 2 in the morning. And it wasn't complicated. It was just terrible. The June fire, the Bronco garage on Alger Road, the newest pin sat almost exactly 3.9 miles out from the Kessler Foundation along the line. That fire happened a little short of 12 years after the night Roy called the smoke in. 12 years of nights. 3.9 miles is a hair over 20,500 feet. 20,500 feet, divided out over 4,300 some nights, is just under 5 feet a night. I checked it against the older pins, the pole barn and the well house and the camp on Hemlock Lake, and it held. Not perfect, a building's a building, not a point. And I was working off a Platt book and not a survey, but every one of them landed inside the slop you'd expect. 5 feet a night, every night, since August of 2013. It had never once stopped, never sped up, never taken a winter off. Whatever Roy Ellefson reported that night is still burning. and its head is moving southwest at about the speed of a man's stride, 1 stride a day, and it has been for 12 years. It doesn't smoke and it doesn't glow. You can stand on that line at noon and feel nothing at all. It only shows up when it gets to something that will burn, and then that thing burns. And a marshal writes undetermined in a box, and it keeps walking. Then I put the straight edge out past the June garage and followed the line where it was going. Alger Road runs into Fremont Street, and Fremont goes past the ball field and the co-op elevator and then up the low rise on the far edge of town. And the last thing on that rise before the county line is the Wyman County Medical Care Facility. 60 beds, long-term care, and a memory unit in the back half. My mother has been in room 14 since March. I drove out there at 3 in the morning. The parking lot lights were on, and the building was dark, except the nurse's station glow and the exit signs. I walked around to the northeast side where the lawn slopes off toward the tree line, and I paced it off from the wall, heel to toe, my boots about a foot out across the grass to where my line came in. 90 feet, 5 feet a night. 90 feet, 18 nights. I tried the ordinary way first. Nobody's going to believe that, but I did. The administrator at the county home is a woman named Donna, who I've known since school. And I sat in her office at 8 the next morning, and I did the best job I could. I didn't say fire. I said I'd been doing demolition work in the township. I'd been going through old fire records, and there was a pattern of structure fires along a line that came up that rise. And I thought somebody ought to look at the northeast end of her building. She was decent about it. She wrote things down. She asked if I'd talked to the fire marshal, and I said I'd talked to Chief Lance, which was true and useless. Then she explained her situation to me in about 4 sentences. And her situation was this. She had 60 residents, 31 of whom couldn't get out of bed on their own, a state survey coming in October, and no authority whatsoever to move anybody anywhere without an order from somebody above her. An evacuation of a skilled nursing facility isn't a fire drill. It's ambulances, it's beds in other counties, it's families, it's the state. Somebody has to sign it, and that somebody needs a hazard on paper with a name and a number. I asked Bud Lance that afternoon what it would take to evacuate a nursing home. He laughed, not meanly. Wade, I can't do it. Sheriff can't do it on my say-so either. You need an actual identified hazard. Gas leak, structure failure, something with a reading on a meter. He rubbed his jaw. And say I could. Say I got everybody out and the place burned. What then? Then nobody dies. Then it's 90 feet past the building the next month, and it's the Lutheran church and the elementary. He held my eye. That's the part you haven't sat with yet. It doesn't stop at your mother's building. It's just going. Getting people out of one place in front of it isn't fixing anything. It's a bucket under a leak. He was right. And I knew he was right before he said it. And hearing it out loud was still bad. So we tried the shortcut. That was my idea, and I'll own it. Bud had laid out 3 pieces of fire out, a unit released, a disposition logged, and I convinced myself we could get away with the first one by itself. Just say the words. Man with a name on a card, standing at the origin, on the frequency, at 20 past 9. Maybe that was enough. Maybe the whole thing was waiting on somebody to answer a man who'd been talking to nobody for 12 years. September 18th. Bud drove out to the Kessler Foundation on Torch Line, which is a hole in the ground now with a hand pump standing in the weeds and a lilac somebody planted a long time ago. He took his portable. I sat in my truck at the base of 6 Mile with the scanner running. At 20 after, the carrier opened and Roy said his piece. Bearing 213, columns tight, 3 or 4 miles out on that line. And Bud keyed up and said, 6 Mile, Ellsworth, Chief. I'm on scene at the Kessler property. Fire's out. Nothing. The carrier held its 40 seconds and dropped, and the frequency went to hiss. And I sat there, listening to my own truck tick. Then Cody came down the stairs. I hadn't known he was up there. His truck was parked back on the 2-track behind the brush pile, where I couldn't see it from the base. And he'd gone up at 9 with his phone because he decided he wanted it on video. And he was 24, and he'd watched me do it and lived. And he thought that made it a thing you could do. He came down that 100 feet holding the rail with one hand, and he came off the last tread wrong and sat down in the gravel. The whole right side of his face was scalded pink, the way you look after a day on the water. His right ear was worse. His right hand had gone up in blisters across the back and the palm because he'd had the phone up and his arm out, filming through the southwest glass, and he'd stayed where I had not stayed. He said, "It got hot faster than last time." Then he said, "It got hot the second the guy quit talking, and then he threw up in the weeds. I drove him to the hospital in Ontonagon with the heat off and the windows down because he couldn't stand air moving on that side. 2:30 in the morning, I sat in a plastic chair and read the discharge paperwork. Superficial partial thickness burns, right hand and right side of face and neck, wound care instructions, a referral to a burn clinic in Marquette, and under mechanism of injury, because the kid told them the truth and the truth doesn't fit in a box. A nurse had typed, "Thermal, source undetermined." There's that word again. 11 buildings and now a person. His girlfriend Katie met us at the door of their apartment at 4 in the morning, 7.5 months along, in a bathrobe. And she looked at his face, and then she looked at me. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That look is going to be with me a while. The rest came down like a stack of blocks. Workers' comp report, MIOSHA notification because it was a job site, and by Friday afternoon, Robin Teskey had pulled my site access on all 4 towers pending review. She called me herself. She didn't enjoy it. "I have an injury on a state site with no explainable mechanism," she said. "I can't have you or anybody out there until safety signs off. And safety is 3 people for the whole peninsula. And wait," she stopped. "The 30th doesn't move. I want to be straight with you. If those towers aren't down, the money reverts. And I have to look at whether the contract gets terminated for cause. And I don't want to do that to you. Terminated for cause means no final payment. It means the excavator note keeps coming, and there's nothing behind it. It also means 6 Mile stays standing, which by then I had started to think of as the one good thing in the whole mess. And then 2 days later, Bud made me understand it wasn't. We were in his office again. I'd told him about the injury and about the arithmetic and the 90 feet. He said, "Don't drop that tower." I said I might not have a choice. "You drop it," he said. "There's no unit to release, ever. That call sits open until the county changes systems, and even then, it'll get migrated. They always migrate. And that line keeps walking." He looked at the wall map with the coffee stain. "Right now, you've got a way to close it. It's an ugly way, and I don't know that it works. But if that tower's a pile of steel on the ground, you've got nothing forever." 8 days left on the count, and I needed the 3rd piece. And the 3rd piece lived behind a talk-through screen in the county building. I didn't go to the counter. I went to her house on a Sunday afternoon. Arlene Voss lives in a little yellow ranch on 3rd Street with a garden she's given up on. She opened the door and saw me, and I watched her decide whether to close it. "You said his name," I said. "I never said it. You did." She stood there with her hand on the door, and then she stepped back and let me into her kitchen. And she poured 2 cups of coffee neither of us drank. I was the night supervisor, she said. August of 2013. I was 44 years old. She told it plain, which I respected. Roy called it in at 9:20. She'd taken smoke reports off 6 Mile before that turned out to be river fog and mill steam, and one time, a neighbor's smudge pot. She sent a deputy up torch line, and the deputy reported no glow visible from the road, which was true because you can't see that house from the road. And she knew that. And she was tired, and it was the end of a long shift. I typed unconfirmed. No correlating report, she said. I didn't assign anybody. And I never went back and put a disposition on it, because in my head, it wasn't a call. It was a nothing. She turned her cup a quarter turn on the table. I found out at 6:15 the next morning. Nobody ever came after you for it? No. Her mouth went thin. The sheriff at the time looked at it and said the deputy cleared the road, and that was reasonable. There was no discipline. There wasn't even a memo. She looked at me straight. I've been sitting 11 feet from that terminal for 12 years, and every time somebody in this county says the word Kessler, I feel it in my stomach. And I'm 2 years from a pension I've earned, Wade, and my husband's on my insurance, and he's got a bad heart. So when a contractor comes to my counter and says the word 6 Mile, yes, I get up and go in the back. I told her all of it. The instrument, the bearing, the 11 fires, the line, 5 feet a night, the 90 feet of grass on the north side of the county home. I told her my mother was in room 14. I told her about Cody's hand. She listened to the whole thing without one interruption, which almost nobody does. Then she got up and went into the other room and came back with a manila envelope she had clearly had in that house for a long time. Inside was a printout of her own CAD entry from August 22nd, 2013. Timestamp, her operator initials, the incident number, the narrative line she'd typed. And down at the bottom, in the field marked disposition, nothing. An empty box with a cursor's worth of white in it. It's still there, she said. It's in the system right now. It migrated in 19. I watched it come across. Can you close it? Not retroactively, not clean. There's no button for 12 years late. She sat back down. But I can reopen it as active and log a disposition against the original number, and it'll flag for audit. And I'll have to explain to the director why I touched a 2013 incident on a Sunday night. She said it steadily, the way you say a thing you've already decided. That's a written reprimand, maybe worse. You'd still have your pension. Probably. She almost smiled. Probably isn't a word I use about money. I didn't push her. I didn't have to. She sat there for maybe a minute, and then she said, "What do you need me at the console for, exactly?" And that was that. We put it together at the fire hall on Thursday, the three of us at the card table, which is the strangest planning meeting I'll ever sit in. Bud would be at the Kessler Foundation with 2 of his guys and a truck, because if he's going to say a fire's out, he wants water on scene. And he said if he's going to lie, he's not going to lie all the way. Arlene would take the overnight Sunday at the console. She traded for it. And somebody had to be in the cab. That part didn't get discussed as much as it should have. It has to be a person up there, Bud said. Out of service is a thing a unit says. And the instrument's the unit. It's the only thing in that building that ever did anything. He looked at me. Cover it and set it to 0, same as that card in the drawer says. But somebody's hand has to be on it. And it's got to be inside the window. And the window is about 4 minutes long. I said I'd do it. Nobody argued. Cody would have. But Cody had a bandaged hand and a girlfriend who wasn't speaking to me. 2 problems, and we solved one. The access review meant I couldn't legally be on that site, and I decided that was a thing I'd deal with in October. That's trespass on state property, and it's a misdemeanor. And if you're keeping a list of the professional decisions I made that month, put it right under the part where I planned to steal the firefinder. The other problem was the heat, and welding gloves were the best idea we had. I ran the count twice more on the shop floor to make sure of the date. 90 feet on the 12th of September, when I paced it. 5 feet a night. That put it against the northeast wall on the 29th. Then on the morning of the 26th, Donna from the county home called me. The wooden entrance sign out front, the one on 2 cedar posts with the county seal routed into it, standing out in the grass on the northeast side of the drive, had charred overnight. Not burned. Charred along the bottom rail, blistered paint, and a black seam about a foot long. And the maintenance man had found it. And there'd been no fire, no smoke call, nothing. She asked me if that was the kind of thing I'd been talking about. I drove out and paced from that sign to the northeast wall. 20 feet, 14 nights since I'd measured. 14 times 5 is 70. 90 minus 70 is 20. It was on schedule to the foot. 4 nights. We had until the 29th, which meant the last night I could be certain of was the 28th. And the towers had to be on the ground by the 30th, or Robin would terminate the contract, which meant I had 1 day between the two and no margin at all. I drove Cody home from his burn clinic appointment in Marquette that Friday because he couldn't grip a wheel yet. He sat in the passenger seat with his hand in a bag of gauze and watched the trees go by for about 40 miles without saying much. Then he said, "Does it know we're coming?" I said I didn't think it knew anything. I said I thought it was a man doing his job at 20 past 9, the way he did it every night for however many years, and nobody had ever told him he could stop. Cody thought about that for a while. "That's worse," he said. September 28th was clear and cold, and I parked on the 2-track behind the brush pile the way Cody had, which tells you something about how much of my judgment was left. Bud radioed in at 9 straight up. He was at the Kessler Foundation with the tanker and 2 of his men, standing next to the hand pump in the weeds. Arlene came on a minute later from the console, formal, using her operator number because she decided that if she was going to do this, she was going to do it correctly on the tape. I climbed at 9:10 with a headlamp, a portable clip to my chest, and a pair of leather welding gloves shoved in my jacket. 100 feet of switchback stairs is nothing to me in daylight. That night, my legs were bad. I stopped twice, and the second time I stood on a landing about 70 feet up and looked southwest, and past the trees I could see the yard light at the co-op and the low glow over town where the county home sits on the rise. 7 miles of dark between me and it, and somewhere out on that grass, 10 feet from a wall, something that had been walking since 2013. I went up through the trap door at 9:14 and left it open behind me. The cab was cold. The cover was off, folded on the sill where it lived. The ring stood at 213 degrees. I put the gloves on the table next to the instrument, and I stood on the north side of the room and waited with my thumb on the transmit bar. At 9:18, the glass on the southwest side started to warm. You don't feel it as heat at first. You feel it as the room going wrong. One side of your face registering something the other side doesn't. Then it built. In 90 seconds, it was like standing beside an open firebox, and my eyes started to water, and the brass on the table began to shine in my headlamp with a wet look because the dust on it was going gray and lifting. At 20 past, the portable on my chest lit up. 6 Mile. Central, 6 Mile. I've got smoke. He filled the room. Same tired, professional voice. 12 years of saying it into a dead channel, and it hadn't gotten any faster, hadn't gotten any louder, hadn't picked up a single note of complaint. Bearing 213. Columns tight, holding straight up, no lean on it. Best guess 3-4 miles out on that line. Arlene came in over the top of him, clear and unhurried. 6 miles central. Copy your smoke, bearing 213. I'm assigning it. Incident number 41976. She read it slow. It was the 2013 number. She'd reopened it 11 minutes earlier, and she'd told me she'd get it out of her mouth, right, or she'd stay on the line all night trying. The carrier didn't drop. That's the moment I knew it was working. And it's the moment the room got serious. The heat came up another step, the kind that makes you turn your face away without deciding to. And I heard the instrument grind against itself on the table, the ring trying to walk. And it was already on the bearing, so that there was nowhere for it to go. And it kept trying anyway. Bud keyed. Central, Ellsworth Chief. I'm on scene at the Kessler property with an engine and 2. Fire's out. Origins cold, nothing showing. A pause, and then off any script we'd written, and the voice of a man standing in a hole in the ground where a house used to be. You called it right, Roy. Nobody came. That's on us, and it isn't on you. Copy, Ellsworth Chief, Arlene said, and her voice went for a second and came back. Fire out at 22 past. 2 pieces. I got the gloves on and reached for the ring. The gloves lasted about 4 seconds. Leather's a good insulator against a flash, not against holding on to something. The brass was past hot. It had gone to the temperature of a skillet somebody's left on a burner. And it came through the palms of those gloves like they were newspaper. I got maybe 15 degrees of turn out of it, and my hands opened up on their own. And I stepped back into the cold side of the room with my arms out from my body, breathing through my teeth. The ring rolled itself back to 213. I want to be exact about the next part, because it's the only part I've had to explain to anybody since. I had about 90 seconds. I could go down the stairs and we'd try again on the 29th. And the 29th was the night it reached the wall. And I would be standing in that same cab, making the same decision, with nothing on the other side of it. Or I could put my hands on it now. There wasn't a moral crisis. I've made it sound like there was one, because that's how people tell these things. But standing in that room, it was arithmetic. The same as everything else that month. 90 feet, 18 nights, 1 pair of hands. I stripped the gloves because they were making it worse. They were bulk and no grip. And I took the ring bare-handed at the 2 sight posts where a man's fingers naturally go. It fought me. That's the part nobody wants to hear, and it's the truest thing in this whole account. It was not a stiff bearing. It was not corrosion. Something on the other end of that ring was pulling southwest, and it had been pulling southwest for 12 years, and it did not want to let go of the only thing it had ever been asked to hold. I brought it around. 213 down through 180, through 90, my arms locked and my shoulder into it. And somewhere around 40 degrees, it quit fighting all at once and went slack and light and rolled up to 0 like a door swinging shut. North. I got the canvas cover off the sill with hands that weren't working right, and I got it over the housing, and I pulled the tie down with my teeth and 1 wrist. And the whole time, I was talking off the radio to nobody, saying the thing I owed that room, that I'd seen a glow-on torch line that night, and told myself it was a burn barrel, and gone home to bed. It doesn't matter that it wouldn't have changed anything. It got said in the place where it should have been said, which was 12 years late and about the right distance from the fire. Then I keyed the portable with the heel of my hand. Central, 6 mile. I had to stop and get my breath. Instruments covered and set to 0. 6 Mile is out of service. The cab went cold. Not gradually, between one word and the next, the heat pulled out of that room like water out of a tub, and the southwest glass ticked as it cooled, and I could see my breath again in the beam of my headlamp. Arlene's voice came through very steady. "Copy 6 Mile. Out of service at 9:24. A pause about 2 seconds long. Incident 41976, disposition logged. Fire out, all units clear. Central out. Nobody said anything for a while. 3 radios open on a county frequency at 9:30 at night, 4 miles apart. And not one of us said a word. Then Bud said, "Wade, you good up there?" And I said I needed a ride. And I sat down on the floor of that cab next to the stool and the dead moth and put my hands palm up on my knees so nothing would touch them, and waited for somebody to come up the stairs. The hand is what it cost. Left one healed. The right one took 2 surgeries in Marquette and a graft off my thigh, and the surgeon was straight with me. The palm and the first 2 fingers were the worst of it, and there'd be contracture and there'd be a limit. I've got a grip now that'll hold a wrench for about a minute before it lets go on its own. That's not a demolition hand. You can't run a machine with a hand that quits without asking. We dropped 6 Mile on the 30th of September, with 14 hours to spare. Cody ran the excavator with his own hand still wrapped, and I stood at the gate with my arm in a sling and signed the hauler's ticket left-handed. And Robin Teskey drove up from Escanaba to watch, which she didn't have to do. She'd gotten my access reinstated on the 29th on an emergency waiver and never asked me where I'd been the night before. And I've always thought she chose not to know. The contract closed. The money came. It went to the excavator note. And then in December, I sold the excavator anyway, because there's no sense making payments on a machine you can't operate. The county cited nothing and found nothing. Arlene got a written reprimand for altering a closed-era record without authorization, exactly what she said she'd get. And she took her retirement in November on schedule with her pension whole. She put a supplemental report in the file on that incident number before she left. It's 2 paragraphs, and it's dry as a stick, and her name is on the bottom of it. And she told me that was the only thing she'd wanted out of the entire business. Bud wrote his 1 page about 11 undetermined structure fires in a line. He sent it up. Nothing came back. He didn't expect anything to. I looked Roy Ellefson up in the spring. He's in the Lutheran Cemetery on Coon Hill Road, east side, flat marker. And there's a woman named Junie in Bruce Crossing, who is his niece and the last of them. I drove up and told her that her uncle called a fire incorrectly on the 22nd of August, 2013, that the record says so now, and that a chief with 30 years on him said out loud on a county frequency that it was not Roy's fault. She thought about that for a while. Then she said, "He got laughed at over the fog thing. He never did get over the fog thing." I said I knew. I didn't tell her the rest of it. She's 71, and there is nothing in the rest of it for her. There hasn't been a fire on that line since. Not the church, not the school, not anything past the county home. The wooden sign out front is still charred along the bottom rail. Donna keeps meaning to have it refinished, and the grass on the northeast side grew back green over the summer the way grass does. And the northeast wall is a wall. Cody's hand came back better than mine. He's got a daughter now, born the 2nd week of November, and he's running his own 2-man outfit off my old customer list. And he calls me when a job needs a second set of eyes. He does not go up towers after dark. I don't think that needed saying, but he says it sometimes anyway, like it's a joke, and it isn't. I go see my mother on Sundays. She's in room 14 with a window that faces east, away from all of it. She saw the bandages back in October, and she asked me what I did to my hand. And I told her I got careless with a piece of equipment, which was as close to true as I could get in a sentence. And now, every few weeks, she notices the scarring again and asks me the same question fresh. I give her the same answer. It doesn't cost me anything to say it twice. The firefinder came out of that cab before the machine went to work. I told Robin it was in the debris pile, and she wrote it up as previously surplused, which it was, in 2013, on a truck to Marquette that I have never once been able to find a record of. It's on the bench in my shop. Cover on, tie down snug, ring set to 0. A man from Green Bay offered me $3,100 for it in the spring. I told him it wasn't for sale.